All right, I think we can slowly start. So welcome to the last people who just joined, and some might still join, but I think we can already start. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nina Benoit, and I am the Director of Systemic Brightest, and I will facilitate this webinar for you today. So today's webinar is hosted by Brightest, which is a unified software and data platform for sustainability and ESG, helping organizations collect data and report on their CO2 emissions, CSRD, and other reporting frameworks and sustainability performance in general. So today we will be discussing the new Omnibus proposal and how it will affect companies preparing for the CSRD, covering the changes proposed in Omnibus last week and how it will affect timelines and company preparation and recommendation for organizations ongoing CSRD compliance right now. So our two speakers today are Carlo Macari. Carlo is the Principal Sustainability Consultant at Brightest, and he is really an expert in CSRD, double maturity assessment and carbon accounting, and has a background in sustainability engineering. Our second speaker today is Mariana Negreiros. Mariana is the newest addition to the Brightest Sustainability Consulting team, and she has a background as a lawyer, so she will really be able to give you a very good understanding of what the Omnibus proposal is about, how Europe works in terms of all different legal entities. And she has already been spending a lot of time analyzing the Omnibus proposal, reading it, analyzing in details. So you will be able to get a lot of insights thanks to her legal expertise. So Carlo, Mariana, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nina, for the nice introduction. So hello, everyone. I'm very happy to start this presentation. And to kick this off, I will start with a couple of clarifications on terms and, really starting from the basis. So what is an omnibus package, first of all? It isn't the first time that we see an omnibus package being delivered or proposed in Europe. Generally, this is a set of proposals that all have a common goal made from the European Commission. So in this case, the omnibus package that we all are talking about and hear about so much in the last days is proposing changing to European sustainability reporting, mostly CSRD, EU taxonomy, CSDDD, CBAM. It's important to note that this package is still in a proposal phase, so there is still quite a few steps before it actually enter into force. And until then, the current regulations remain effective as law until Omnibus is passed. Passing means that it has to be voted by all the bodies of the EU, and then it has to be approved and also transposed into national regulation by the individual member states. So a little bit of the context maybe on why do we see this coming now. Of course, we all know it's a time of geopolitical changes and shifts. Internally in Europe, we see more power going to the right wings in general, but also beyond Europe, the messages that we are getting are generally not really going towards more and more efforts in sustainability. This is being translated into a narrative that we find questionable, actually, about the improved competitiveness that companies need in Europe and the reduced costs of operation, which relate to regulatory burden. Let's now see more or less how this is going to happen and how this is going to impact us. So there are two points, and these are really two separate legislative proposals. So the first one is proposing to reduce the scope of companies reporting under CSRD and also the other frameworks, so that more or less 80% of the companies which are now having to report will not have to report anymore, and also reduce the actual requirements for the regulation. So less data points and a simpler process in general. The second part of this proposal is really having to do with the timeline for the reporting, and it's mostly impacting the cohorts which have to report for CSRD in the next two waves, so those publishing in 2026 and in 2027. And there is also a 1-year delay proposed for the CS Triple D. So this is the context, this is what we're going to talk about today. And the way that we are going to discuss this is under three different perspectives. So the first is how does it happen that a EU policy is developed and approved? Then we are going to deep dive into what the Omnibus proposal means, especially with a focus on CSRD, to then talk about what's coming next, so a couple of possible scenarios and what we think is likely to happen, and together with some recommendations. At the end of this, we're of course going to have a Q&A, so we are looking forward for all the questions that you might have. For this first part, I'm going to leave the stage and the mic now to Mariana. Mariana, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Carlo. I'm going to explain a little bit how EU policies are developed and approved. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about how the policies are crafted in Europe, how Omnibus process will be handled, how long it takes for a proposal to be approved, what changes can we anticipate in the Omnibus process, and when we can expect this update to take effect. European legal decision-making process has multiple steps and involves three different bodies. UA has three main powers, three institutions, each one have its role. So we have the Commission that represents overall interests of NGOs, people, companies, communities, institutions within Europe. We have the Parliament. The Commission, just a minute, is the one that proposed and drafted the Omnibus package. Now we have the other institution, that is the Parliament, represents the citizens, and it has 120 seats, and it's directly elected by each country. We have the Council of the European Union that represents the governments composed of 27 heads of states. Here, there is a typical decision-making process in Europe. Here is a timeline of how does it look. And the first step is the Commission propose a draft text, such as an amendment or a legislative framework. In this case, is the Omnibus package. To create this proposal, the Commission consults various stakeholders, including companies, NGOs, and conduct impact assessments. In other words, we can say is that they engage with the right people, making it highly likely to their proposal to pass. And we have, when the Commission presents the draft, the next step is the Parliament and the Council review the text. And this stage is called the first reading. Right now, we are in this bit in between. The Commission submitted the Omnibus package, and we are waiting the first reading. For the first reading, there is no time limit for the review. Usually it takes between 1 year and 1.5 years. In the case of the CSRD, it took 1 year and 1 month for the first reading. The Parliament may propose amendment or pass the draft as it is, and the Council will do the same. If both agree on the text, will be published in the European Official Journal, and the proposal becomes effective. For example, if Omnibus passes in the first reading, it took 20 days to become effective. Important question is in this process, in this reading, is that possible the Parliament or the Council expand the scope of the proposal? It is possible, but is not likely, based on legal principles and the division of power. Like each institution, as I mentioned before, has its own functions, and usually they respect each other. So the Commission proposed amendments and the legislation, and the Parliament and the Council review it. Another important question is how much is likely to pass in this Omnibus pass in this first reading. So historically, the proposals presented by the Commission are highly likely to be approved since the legislative groundwork has already been done. Commission usually gets a first reading approval rate around 67%. But if it's not approving this first part, this first reading, it goes to a second reading where about 24% of the proposal are approved. And if it still doesn't pass, it moves to a conciliation council for further discussion. But the rate is super low, around 90% the cases are being decided in this stage. We can pass to the next slide. Now, we're going to take a look on the composition of the parliament and set possible scenarios and stages for Omnibus. It's important to understand the approval requirement for the parliament is a simple majority. Doesn't mean that it's 50% of the votes plus one vote. And we can analyze this political scenario by two lenses. First, the countries, and second, the parties. We've analyzed the division per country. We don't have answer right now because many of the seats of other countries, I'm going to explain, will play a decisive role. Because we have Germany and France holding almost 25% of the seats supporting the approval of the proposal. And on the other side, we have Italy and Spain that are opposed the Omnibus packet openly, holding 19% of the seats. So the rest, around 55%, still playing a decisive role to this final setting of voting. But if you look to the parties, we can consider that the Omnibus will be likely to be approved with almost 60% because we have the right wing and far right holding almost 57% of the seat, and they prioritize economic interest over climate policies, and we have the center influence holding 11% that often align with the right-wing positions on regulatory and economic issues. We're going to look as well to the political scenario of the Council. Here, the approval requirement is a qualified majority that need 55% of the member states approving, and the majority of the Council is aligned with center-right parties such as European People's Party, Renew Europe, European Conservatives and Reformists, and the proposal is likely to be passed. The opposition center is expected, but the burden will be not strong enough to block the proposal. And if the Omnibus package is approving this first reading, we have to consider a key question as well, that is raised about the status of the countries that already incorporate CSRD. So, in the European Union, we can say that each country has the discretion to decide how they're going to handle their own national law. This is the principle of sovereignty. It says that states may amend, repeal, or retain the legislation. So, regarding the implementation of no Omnibus, would likely vary by country, because a country like Spain or a country like Italy can have this own discretion to decide if the package is approved to retain. So what we recommend to the companies to closely monitor this development in each jurisdiction that they operate. For summarize this section, it's important to highlight that the Parliament, the Council, and each state need to review the proposal, the Omnibus. So until this process is completely, we have to remember that the CSRD is in effect.
Thank you so much, Mariana, for the great deep dive. So I know this is a lot of information and it might be a little bit complicated to understand this whole process, and I think you did a great job at explaining it, Mariana. Thank you so much. So here are 3 points that you should remember. And the first one is that, as Mariana explained, the Omnibus is just a proposal. And we have seen a lot of communication on LinkedIn, a lot of false information saying that right now companies that are less than 1,000 employees don't need to report anymore. this is not the case. It is just a proposal. So that's something that it is likely to pass, but it is just a proposal. And I think, Mariana, you explained the whole process very much in detail, and that was very helpful to understand why it hasn't been approved yet. The second point is that given the political context, it does seem like it will be approved, although it will potentially be with changes in the current text. So when we look at the composition of the parliament, in fact, it is more likely that it will be approved. However, this approval implementation will likely require between 1 and 1.5 years. So it might be safer to continue your work as you might be if you're in scope for 2025 and 2026, as the final version, which might or might not be approved, will only be released next year.
Sorry, my mic was off. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Mariana. So maybe now, from this point, it may be interesting to see what is really actually going to change for the CSRD, specifically in the event that the Omnibus proposal passed as is and is approved. So the proposal is composed of 6 different documents. This is a bit of a guiding principle, maybe if you want to read into this on your own, or if you're trying to orientate in this whole text. But essentially, some of these texts are giving more an indication of what is going to happen in terms of implementation dates. Some others are giving more specification about the actual changes and what are going to be all the amendments in terms of content and scope relatively to all of the different parts of regulation interested by this package. So yeah, maybe we can focus especially on CSRD, and I think that the sort of bomb sentence that we read on the legislation was that the number of undertakings which are subject to mandatory sustainability reporting requirements in the case of the approval of the package would be reduced by about 80%. This means that any company which is having under 1,000 employees is not going to have to report anymore. This is also including the listed or non-listed SMEs. So it's a pretty big change, and it's pushing us back of a few years. For example, when in 2014, I think the NFRD was approved and passed, the scope was actually more comprehensive than this. So it's quite of a backlash in terms of ambition and scope of companies interested and obliged to report for sustainability. So the actual impacts of the Omnibus proposal are maybe under 3 different perspectives. The first one is the new reporting scope. As anticipated, all companies below 1,000 employees don't have to report anymore. And there is here also a second part of the threshold, which is given by the finances. So if the company with more than 1,000 employees has either over 50 million turnover yearly or have over 25 million assets, then it's subject to the reporting. Otherwise, it simply isn't. There are also changes in terms of scope, applicability for companies which are not in the EU but have business interest in the EU. So groups have to report at a group level if they have more than 450 millions of turnover in the EU. Before, this threshold was of around 1/3 of this. The EU branches will have to report individually if they have more than 50 million in turnover, and the EU subsidiaries, they are just going to have to report based on the same thresholds for EU companies, so over 1,000 employees and turnover of more than 50 millions or more than 25 millions in balance sheet. So again, quite a drastic change in terms of who's in scope for CSRD, but what changes is also the timeline. So One of the big proposals at this point is this stop the clock sort of provision that would delay by 2 years the reporting requirements for all companies who haven't already published. So no one would have to report during the year 2026 and 2027, but like starting only in 2028 based on the financial year 2027 data. And this is sort of probably, to give time to the European Commission, Parliament, and Council to agree on everything and to publish the new data points, the updated set of rules for the reporting that are also expected to come. In fact, and this is the third big difference, there are some changes expected that at a level of actually what the CSRD contains and is about. Firstly, there's very likely going to be a reduction of the data points. So the Omnibus package is talking about a simplification of the reporting requirements, not only in terms of companies that have to report, but in terms of how and how much they have to report. So on one side, we'll probably see a reduction of all the data points which are general. So what now is in the ESRS 2. But then beyond that, we are likely going to see a prioritization of quantitative data over qualitative data points, and also an increase of all the data points which are marked as voluntary as for now. A big change is also coming from the assurance or from the auditing perspective. As for now, it would remain limited. Now we are under the current CSRD waiting for a standard report like dictating how to do the assurance, and on the other side also on a change from limited to reasonable assurance. This is not going to happen. It's going to stay limited with the purpose of not overloading companies with more stringent auditing requirement and the expenses that come from that side. And also the standards, so the standards relative to how the assurance is performed are not going to come out. They're just going to be replaced by some guidelines giving an indication on how to do this. There's also not going to be any sector-specific standards, so this part that we were expecting probably for next year is not going to come out. So all companies will just have to report on the same data points and all the same topical standards, regardless of their vertical, of their industry. And in terms of value chain, there is also quite a substantial difference, which is a limit on the reporting obligation on the value chain, particularly regarding the data that companies need to disclose. So it is true that organizations will still have to include the value chain in their, for example, in their double materiality assessment, but then they will not have to, or they will not be able to actually require data from suppliers which are exempt from CSRD. So all the companies, suppliers which are below these thresholds will not have to provide data. So this is hopefully going to reduce the stress on the suppliers. In terms of what will remain from the CSRD as we know it today, probably three main concepts. One is maybe the biggest point of CSRD, which is the double materiality assessment. This will remain. There has been voices of like trying to pivot this towards only a financial impact or impact assessment. Is going to be as is. So double materiality keeps being the way to go. And also the existing topical standards, so the ESRS 2 plus all those 1 to 10 will remain. So even though they are going to be probably lighter in terms of data points contained, companies will still have to include their value chain, the entire value chain, when they are analyzing their impacts, their risks and opportunities. This again will stay. And also there are going to be frameworks for reporting for smaller companies or for companies which are not in scope. The voluntary as framework, as has been developed, is still in place and will likely remain the same. So I hope this is making sense to all of you, and it's not too complex. Now that we have an overview and an understanding of what is going to change, let's try and answer this question, which is maybe the main one why everyone is here. So what is next? What's going to happen if this package is approved? But in general, now that even just there is a proposal. So we think that there are 4 possible ways to go, 4 possible scenarios going to materialize anytime between now and the next probably 1.5 years. The first one is the Omnibus just is not approved. So in this case, companies will still have to report on CSRD, taxonomy, CSDDD under the current settings. So things will not change. It's probably not really likely, given what we learned from Mariana's presentation and from what we know until now. There is a second scenario, which is Omnibus is changed, potentially simplifying the reporting requirements, but not under the current proposal. So there is going to be a simplification package. It's not just going to be the package that we see today. This might impact the actual scope, so the number of companies that have to report, or maybe the actual simplification in terms of data points or reporting requirements. Then a third scenario, which is Omnibus is going to be approved as it is now, but it will not enter into force, at least in all the member states, before the next reporting deadline, meaning that if companies now have to report in 2026 on 2025 data, it might be that the Omnibus passes, but then the provisions of this Omnibus are not known until 2027, and then at that point, during this deadline year, the reporting requirements are still the same and companies still have to report. And then a fourth scenario, which is Omnibus is going to be approved, and it's going to be approved enough fast so that it can be transposed into country-specific regulation within this year. So this would be sort of the minimum stress scenario in which companies would know clearly and quickly what they have to do, and it's what everyone is hoping for in the case of the approval of this package, but we think it's not really likely that this is going to happen, given just the bureaucratic and administrative times required to actually approve and develop a law from the Omnibus package. So our baseline scenario, the case where we think is more likely going to materialize, is Omnibus will be approved. We don't know exactly how, we don't know what changes, but for sure there is uncertainty about the timeline. So we've seen other provisions like these, other Omnibus packages being proposed, demanded, and also based on the precedent historically and how the parliament looks like now, how Europe looks like now, there is a good chance that this Omnibus is going to pass. We don't know when, so the actual timeline is still very uncertain. We know that there is a desire to sort of fast track Omnibus, meaning putting pressure on whoever has to take a decision, doing the review and decide on this, to do that faster. But in any case, it's not likely that this is going to happen. Actually, this fast track proposal is a part of the Omnibus proposal. So while they're proposing the changes, they're also proposing sort of a shorter timeline to adopt it, to approve it. So we think that probably nothing is really going to change until 2026. So here, a little bit of a schematic representation of the timeline that would materialize in case Omnibus is going into effect. So companies that are beyond the threshold of 1,000 employees and turnover and balance sheets will keep having to report. So nothing is really going to change for them. Those who are below these thresholds and were in scope until now, so the listed EU public interest entities that had the report due in 2025, we still really don't know what's going to happen in 2025, but then for 2026 and beyond, there is not going to be any obligation for reporting. All other large EU companies, if they are above this threshold, will have to report, but from 2028 onwards, and nothing in this couple of years between now and then. And if they are below these numbers, they are simply not going to have to report, as won't have to report all other companies. So all the listed SMEs and the non-listed SMEs and all the companies which are really below this 1,000 employee threshold. Of course, for them, there are voluntary standards. There are the VSMEs, and it's recommended, and it's probably a very good idea to report with these standards. They are still, keeping the core of what CSRD is in terms of materiality, types of studies and analysis that you have to do as an organization that drives a better understanding of your business, of your risks and opportunities, of what your impacts really are. But this is not going to be mandatory. And for what concerns the foreign companies, they will have to report if they are above the thresholds from 2028, and will not have to report, or only on a voluntary basis, if they are below this threshold that we illustrated before. So essentially quite a big change, and curious to hear what you all think about this and in which way you're going to be impacted as an organization by this new proposal. Maybe to conclude, a couple of recommendations. So what to do now? What would we do at your place, or what would be an advice to give to you? So of course, it depends on what kind of company you are based on the applicability on your thresholds. Large companies, whether this is passing or not, things are not going to change too much for you. So stay on course, complete your reporting process. Of course, you can consider waiting for the new list of data points, which is expected to come out approximately 6 months after the approval, if this approval ever comes out to be happening. Because based on this data, you're going to be able to do your now correct gap analysis and consequently the reporting. But we would really encourage to do your preparation for CSRD, because we've seen many companies lagging behind and underestimating the effort level. So we think it's a good idea to keep doing this and not risking to be late in case the obligation is applying to you. For all companies which potentially are going to be scoped out, more or less the same reason. So there is a risk in stopping reporting, stopping your DMA and the rest of the process. If then this doesn't pass and you have to report, then you will be late for this and you will face or risk to face fines for not compliance. So if you started, definitely complete your materiality assessment, which anyway is a very good indicator of your impacts and risk and opportunities. So it's very healthy as a tool, let's say, for your organization to have. Consider reporting in 2026, even if you won't pass. You may want to adopt voluntary frameworks, or just keep with the reporting thresholds and frameworks as they are. But probably, good idea to complete your process. And for all the small and medium enterprises, there's likely not going to be a need to report anymore. But this, again, is not really said. So we don't think we can say stop the engines and forget about CSRD, especially because double materiality and other concepts of the CSRD still are very valuable for understanding the impacts and the risks and opportunities of your organization. So again, you can consider voluntary reporting, and then you can also consider different types of frameworks for sustainability reporting based on what are your needs and what are your ambitions. So I thank you very much for staying with us until now. I hope this wasn't too much information or too complex information. Um, yeah, if you have any questions, we are very happy to take them.
Super. Thank you so much, Carlo. If you have any questions, you can simply write them down in the comment section. So feel free to write down your questions. And in meanwhile, I have a question for both of you, and whoever feels comfortable can answer it. So this question is, do you think it's possible that the omnibus proposal will change further? So for instance, could it be possible that the threshold of 1,000 employees is not 1,000, but for example, 500 employees? Could it be a change? Or can it be changed, the omnibus proposal, at this point?
Carlo,
So
do you want to give your opinion and then I give mine?
yeah, sure. So everything is still up in the air. The games are very much open, and there is no consensus in general about this. So um, there is a very high likelihood that things are going to change. So the thresholds might change. Also because many companies already invested in sustainability reporting for CSRD, and no one really wants to having this money sort of misallocated. So Europe first doesn't really want to have their own companies like spending in something that then is not really required anymore. So also as a sign of trust that the EU still wants to hold for member states, there is probably a good likelihood that things are going to change, and it might be that companies still have to report, companies that had to report until now, but with softer requirements. Um, so yeah, anything is still um, possible, maybe even likely at this stage. But Mariana, what do you think?
So I will think we will have like the parliament and the council will have like, if they're gonna amend the draft, they will have a consensus about the scope and will be in the first round. I think this is a too important topic to go to the second reading or to the conciliation committee. And yeah, but it's still uncertain for this year, I think, what is gonna change. And we should wait and see how is the alignments, like how it will be the position of the parliaments regarding other sustainability issues that they came from discussion. We have to follow the news and follow the press from the parliament to draft a possible scenario for diminishing the scope or even like other like sector obligations from the CSRD.
That makes a lot of sense, and there's in fact a lot of uncertainty, and anything could still change right now until mid 2026 potentially, right? So very curious to see how this develops. And so if a company, let's say, is in the middle of their DMA, what should they do then? And they're below 1,000 employees, so they're thinking, okay, maybe I don't need to report. What would be the best course of action right now?
Well, in this case, you are in this situation in which, like, do you want to stop studying for the test, not knowing if it's actually going to happen, and potentially it's going to happen, or you want to still prepare for the test, and then the test is likely not going to happen? This probably the answer is, if you're preparing for this test and the test is not happening, you still have something that you win out of this, in the sense that you are more aware of how your company is interacting with all ESG topics that you analyzed. You've done a very good assessment, a double materiality assessment that still stays constant in the sense that as long as your business doesn't really change significantly, your DMA doesn't really change significantly. So my take would be, keep doing it, you ultimate it, and then you will have a very good picture of where you stand in terms of ESG, and this picture will stay. So you can work on that in the years to come. You can use it as a reference, and also you don't risk lagging behind in the case that then Omnibus doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen as is now proposed, and you have to report. Everyone who's doing DMA knows how complex DMA is and how much time it takes. So I don't think anyone wants to really be in the situation when you have to do it in a rush, and it's not really something that you can do in a rush.
And I think we should remember that reporting is only not because it's like mandatory by a country. It has a lot of benefits besides, like even financial. If a company does the double materiality assessment, they're gonna see a picture where they like can save money or they can improve. So it's not like only because it's mandatory that you should stop. You have to see other impacts such as the branding of the company, how the market will consume your product, if you have like a sustainability statement. So there, I think you should consider other impacts as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point, and of course, completing a double maturity assessment is very helpful for a company. And so, Mariana, you went through the whole process, right, of approval. Could you walk us through it again to understand, okay, from this omnibus proposal, what needs to happen until this proposal is approved?
Okay, so first the parliament will read. They're gonna have a session to reading, and they're gonna vote if the parties want to amend a point, for example, the scope of they will pass as it is. It's like meetings and readings, and each proposal it takes a time. It's not like certain that the parliament will read one session that will be 1 hour. So you have this, and as omnibus, it's being a hot topic and everybody's talking about, I think it's not going to be an easy meeting. And then after the parliament decide if they're going to, what is the final draft, if they're going to amend, they send to the council, and the council will do the same. So it's going to meet with each other, they're going to debate, but the debates in the council are more straightforward because there are less members, and they're going to vote. And this could take 1 week or 3 months. So this is, it calls the first reading. So if both of the institutions agree on what is, like, if the council change another positions, another amendments, the parliament could still not approve after, and it's gonna have to have a second reading. But usually they already like agree because you have like, this lobbying work behind it. So if a draft is not coming to approval of both, it goes to the second reading. Then you have the law that says that the first meeting of the parliament had to take 3 months after, and after the parliament decide in this time framework that we don't know exactly, you have 3 more months to the committee to the council get together to see the draft, and it is very unlikely that we'll get there, and even so, if you have a third option, that is unite a conciliation committee. That is a process that is different. They unite stakeholders, they unite important associations and states, and each conciliation council has its own logic, how it will be approved, and it's more or less like that. I hope. Tell me if it's clear,
Yeah.
or I can.
Thank you so much for the explanation. Yeah, it's a lot more clear, and well, it definitely sounds like a very lengthy process. So, and this is also something that we've heard in other webinars and from other experts, that they don't expect anything to be approved by next year, probably mid 2026. So it makes sense with what you're explaining, that this approval process is quite long, right? And so another question would be, so for companies, and this is something that we've heard, if their legal team is telling them, okay, right now you need to stop reporting because you have less than 1,000 employees in Europe, what should they do? Is this correct, or why is their legal team telling them that?
So I think what we have now, and this is not what I think, but it's for sure what we have now is a proposal. So um, there is, as we've heard, as we've seen today, like a different likelihood that this is going to change and come into force as is or not, but we still don't know really. So now it's really early. So if you heard this from your legal team, probably go through this again, make sure that you have a complete understanding, and focus on the fact that there is a process to bring this from the stage where we are now, which is the approval, and the actual implementation, which is, as Mariana was saying, all these different steps within the EU. And then there is another part, which is the actual implementation from the countries. So we've seen some countries adopting CSRD very speedy after it was published by the EU. Some other countries lagging behind a little bit more and struggling. Still, the countries have this sovereignty principle for which they can decide how much they want to apply these provisions of the omnibus. So it's really not true that things are like this now. If you think that you don't have to report anymore, take a second look at that, because what you have now is a proposal. Things we don't know how much, but almost for sure will change.
Yes, completely agree. I think if you already stay on the track because you already put effort and energy to that, and you already have like a budget and you have a team organized. So yes, and it considered the whole scenario, customers, branding, and yes, that is a proposal. I agree with Carlo.
That makes a lot of sense, and so if I understand correctly, this means that a country could not implement Omnibus, right? Is that correct?
As it is now.
Yes.
Yeah. Every country has to wait that this is approved, and then only then there's going to be internal movement in each country.
Very clear. And so how do you think that organizations in this very uncertain time around this regulation can ensure that they remain compliant?
So I think one big part of this is, of course, like CSRD requires a process which is lengthy, almost by definition. There are so many things to analyze, which for sure it's requiring an effort in terms of time, in terms of budget. The one thing that for sure is beneficial is understanding your impact, which is DMA essentially. So I would say do that. And this is also, the most lengthy process. If something is going to come up and things are really going to change, we are going to see that happening progressively, in the sense that, the approval of such a law is something very much politic. So we're going to see a situation evolving in Europe in the next weeks, in the next months. And then depending on how things change, we are going to see the likelihood of a vote being against or in favor evolved, and change over time. So now that the proposal is out, we're also going to see the answer from the industry, from what different organizations think, and this is going to steer the decision, which again is going to be a political decision. So I would say stay on track. Also, don't overinvest, of course, but stay on track. Keep your eyes open, see what's happening around you. See also, if the debates about this, for example, about the first reading, if they start in 1 week, probably things are going to be faster. If they are not starting in the next month, things are going to be slow, as we all expect they will be. So do what is most important, which is your double materiality assessment. And then probably the last part that you will have to undergo, which is the auditing. This is also likely one of the biggest slices of your budget. It's a very expensive, because it's very time consuming as a process. So probably you can wait to do that. In the meantime, you can do the rest of your assessment, so you don't risk non-compliance if things don't come out like as they are now, and if things change and you don't have to report, you still added value for your company.
Yeah, and I would say follow us because we're gonna be looking to the parliament decisions, to their schedule to see how when this first meeting will be handled, how is the tendency and the composition, and yes, we're gonna be with our eyes open as well.
And how do you feel like people are reacting to this proposal? What is the overall sentiment among companies and governments, countries? How is everyone reacting right now since the announcement last week?
So it's early to say, right? In the sense that this just happened since a week or so. In general, I think that everyone feels a little bit like short in trust in the capability of EU of proposing a regulation and sticking with it. Like CSRD was not something like, per se. It was a consequence to the need, which is an actual and a very urgent need to reach some goals for the limitation of the anthropic impacts by 2050. There are goals even in the shorter term of that. So this is the context around it. I think everyone is feeling a little bit like, what's going to happen now? What is the trust level probably is not really high. Many companies we know are doubting on whether they should continue or not with their assessment. Like hundreds, probably thousands of companies are just in the midst of their DMA. So for sure, the mood is not the greatest. Companies are in doubt. Companies are feeling like somehow failed, in the sense that they are doing this maybe because they really want and they're virtuous, maybe because they have to because of a rule, and now this rule falls. So for sure, no one's really happy in terms of like ambition and like how things change. We've seen a little bit of everything, in the sense that on one side there are the companies that wanted to report because they wanted to comply and not get a fine, and they are the first saying we stop reporting. Even though this is exposing them to a risk of ultimately not compliance if things don't go through. On the other side, there are the companies that really report under CSRD because now CSRD is the standard, but before that they wanted to report because they wanted to do their part. Let's say they wanted to at least be aware of the risks and opportunities, understand their impacts, and these companies still want to report no matter the changes under Omnibus proposal. So it's very divided. I think we'll have a better picture in the days or potentially a couple of weeks to come.
Yeah, and there is a lot of misinformation, not because it's the directive and the legislation process. It's hard, it's complicated, and sometimes you have to really pay attention to see, to analyze it, to understand what is being proposed by the text, because you have a lot of documents, as Carlos showed. So what it is, the changes, and how the process will take, because it's a proposal. People are saying that it's already in effect, but you have to consider the country. So it's hard to organize what is actually the scenario, and the scenario still is uncertain. So it's being hard.
Definitely, I think uncertainty is the key word today that everyone is feeling. But I hope that this webinar brought a bit of clarity for everyone who is confused right now, maybe out of scope according to the proposal, or still in scope but not sure if they're affected or not. So I hope that for all the people who joined, or all the people who will watch the recording, which will be published on YouTube, this was helpful. Do you have any final words or comments, Carlo or Mariana?
Yeah, I think as you were saying, Nina, this is the moment of big doubts, and again, I hope this was helping. This webinar was helpful. No final remarks. Thank you to everyone for attending, and yeah, that's it from me. Happy to having been here.
Me too. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nina, and thank you, Carlo. And yes, still a long path to see what is going to happen.
Definitely. And we'll keep on posting updates regarding this and making sure to keep everyone informed. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Carlo, Mariana. You can see all our LinkedIn profiles. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Carlo and Mariana, for speaking and sharing all these insights today. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.